In 1923, in Berlin, there were people who did everything society told them to do. They saved. They bought government bonds. They trusted banks. They trusted money. And within just a few months, their life savings could no longer buy a cup of coffee. At the same time, a farmer outside the city with no title, no polished bank account, no safe portfolio, was richer than ever. One pig could be traded for an upright piano. A field of wheat was worth more than a banker's lifetime of savings. History has seen this before. The tools changed. The pattern didn't. When money dies, it is not just the currency that dies with it. The illusion of safety dies too. Savings accounts, bonds, fixed pensions. The very things people call responsible are often the first things to be crushed when the rules of the system change. This video will show you 6 types of assets that have survived the biggest monetary collapses in history. But these are not 6 assets serving the same function. These are 6 different ways to survive when money dies. This is not theory. This is not prediction. This is a pattern that has repeated again and again. Inside the same crisis, 2 people can end up living in completely different realities. On one side, there was a banker in Berlin, 30 years of work, saving, accumulating, buying the assets his society considered the safest of all. Everything was orderly, legal, respectable, civilized. It was the kind of life the system tells you to build. On the other side, there was a wheat farmer outside the city. No financial degree, no investment products, no elegant statements, just land, seeds, livestock, and the ability to produce something people actually needed. When the German mark began to collapse, those 2 worlds split apart. The banker discovered that safety was just a promise, and that promise only mattered as long as the system could keep it. The farmer, meanwhile, held something outside that system. A pig could be traded for furniture. A storehouse of grain could be traded for gold. A piece of land could feed a family while paper money turned into trash. That is when history exposes the difference between money and wealth. Money is a symbol. Wealth is what still matters after the symbol collapses. This is the biggest mistake people make in every monetary crisis. They confuse money with wealth. Money is not wealth. Money is a ticket, a measuring unit, a promise that on the other side of that piece of paper, something real is still waiting to be exchanged for it. Wealth is that real thing. Food, energy, metals, land, shelter, useful labor, skills people will still pay for, the things human beings still need. Even when the financial system begins to come apart, and when that monetary promise starts to break, society does not stop to debate whether it is fair. It does something much simpler. It runs away from the melting unit of account toward anything that can hold value better. That is when the most familiar things begin to betray you. The savings account still looks clean. The bond is still sitting there. The pension still appears on paper. But if the measuring unit of the entire economy is dying, those numbers do not mean what they used to mean. Safe is often just familiar. And what looks safest is often just what people have been trained to trust. That is why the first asset on this list is not a glamorous stock, not a complex financial product, and not something that simply sounds modern. The first asset is productive land. Not all land is the same. A plot inflated by cheap credit is not the same as a field that can produce wheat. A piece of land waiting for speculation is not the same as a farm with water, seed, and the ability to generate output. What survives in a crisis is not real estate in the abstract. It is land with real utility. When money collapses, the economy does not disappear. People still need to eat. They still need clean water. They still need wood, energy, shelter, and the essentials of daily life. That is why productive land is often one of the first places wealth runs to when it is fleeing paper money. A wheat field does not need a central bank to prove its value. A farm does not need a functioning bond market to remain useful. Paper changed form. Human behavior didn't. When money weakens, people move back toward what is tangible. In major monetary collapses, productive land is not just an asset. It becomes power. Look at the logic of that farmer in Weimar. He did not need to forecast next month's inflation number. He did not need to watch bond yields. He did not need to cling to the belief that the government would keep its promises. He had what people needed right now: wheat, meat, milk, eggs, firewood. Life itself carries value before any balance sheet does. That is the key point. Land does not survive because it goes up in the modern financial sense. It survives because it keeps producing even when money breaks. It is wealth before it is an investment. And this is the first contrarian turn in the video. What many people call civilized, responsible. Well-structured assets are often just polished wrappers around systemic risk. Meanwhile, the things dismissed as old, heavy, or primitive are often the things that survive the longest. But land has a weakness. It is real, but it is not flexible. It is powerful, but it is not portable. And that is why, when trust in official money begins to crack, society usually runs toward the second asset almost on instinct: gold. The second asset is gold. Not because gold is magical, not because it generates cash flow, and not because it outperforms everything else in every period. Gold survives because it does one thing paper money cannot do. It does not need someone else to keep a promise for it. Across thousands of years, through collapsing empires, debased coinage, to war, and inflation, human beings have repeated the same reflex. When trust in official money begins to crack, they move toward precious metals, not because they are nostalgic, but because underneath every modern financial system, human nature still understands something very old. What is scarce, durable, and impossible to print at will holds the memory of value better than paper with a government seal on it. That is gold's real role. It is not a get-rich-quick tool. It is a refuge when the system begins redefining what money means. Cash is melting ice. Gold is an anchor. The important thing is to understand what gold actually protects you from. Gold does not protect you from every short-term swing. It does not pay monthly bills. It does not replace skill. It does not grow wheat. It does not generate electricity. But when the measuring unit of the whole economy is being bent out of shape, gold becomes an alternative yardstick. It helps preserve purchasing power while everyone around you is still counting wealth in a unit that is becoming more artificial by the month. That is why, in monetary crises, gold does not simply go up. A more accurate way to say it is this: gold is not necessarily becoming more expensive. The currency used to measure it is becoming weaker, faster than the crowd is willing to admit. On the surface, the person holding cash looks safer. Everything feels neat, liquid, under control. But in a crisis of confidence, liquidity does not save purchasing power. You can hold a great deal of cash and still become poorer every single month. But gold has limits too. It stores value extremely well. It does not always give you flexibility in daily life. And that is why the third asset matters. Silver. The third asset is silver. If gold is an anchor, silver is a lifeboat. Gold protects larger stores of value. Silver becomes more useful in everyday life when the monetary system starts cracking at street level. In many periods of disorder, the problem is not just preserving wealth. The problem is exchange. You cannot shave a sliver off a gold bar every time you need food, but silver, in smaller units, easier to divide, easier to circulate, often fills the exact gap paper money leaves behind. That is why, throughout history, gold and silver almost always move together. Gold is for preserving purchasing power at scale. Silver is for flexibility, circulation, and survival in day-to-day life. Many people treat silver as just a cheaper version of gold. That is too narrow. In crisis, silver plays a different role. It becomes the bridge between stored wealth and the real economy. When confidence in paper money weakens, anything that can be held, divided, traded, and widely accepted becomes more valuable than it first appears. But like gold, silver is not magic either. It does not create food. It does not create cash flow. It does not replace land. And it does not replace skill. Silver's real value lies somewhere else. It lies in its ability to keep exchange from breaking down completely when official money begins to lose credibility. That is what modern finance content often misses. People love to talk about yield, growth, percentage returns. But in a true monetary crisis, the first question is no longer, how much did I make? The first question becomes, can I trade this for something I actually need? And at that point, silver becomes intensely practical. Less glamorous than gold, but sometimes the less glamorous asset is the more useful one in real life. The tools changed. Human behavior didn't. When large systems begin to shake, people return to forms of exchange that are small, real, simple, and testable by hand. Still, precious metals only solve part of the problem. They help you preserve value. They do not necessarily help you create new value. And that is where the fourth asset comes in. Businesses with pricing power. The fourth asset is a business with pricing power. That sounds modern, but the logic is just as old as land, gold, or silver. In every period of disorder, the survivor is not always the person with the most money. It is the person who can pass rising costs onto someone else while demand remains intact. A bakery during inflation, an energy company during shortage, a business selling food, transportation, medicine, or anything customers cannot easily cut out. That is what matters. Because when money loses value, every cost starts rising. Raw materials rise, wages rise, shipping rises, borrowing costs rise. Weak businesses get squeezed. But businesses with pricing power do the opposite. They push that pressure outward. They protect margins. And in doing so, they protect the owner's real economic value. This is where many people get it wrong. They assume that owning stocks automatically protects them from inflation. It does not. Most businesses do not have real pricing power. They have nominal revenue, while their real economic strength quietly shrinks underneath. History makes this very clear. In periods of high inflation, businesses selling things people can postpone are often hit first. Consumers cut back. They delay purchases. They stop spending on things that only serve short-term comfort. But businesses selling electricity, food, keel, fuel, medicine, transportation, or products tied to strong brands that are difficult to replace carry a kind of shield that cash does not. Their customers are forced to come back. That is the key point. A business with pricing power is not just selling a product. It is selling something people cannot easily avoid. And the deeper the crisis gets, the more visible that advantage becomes. But this is also an important contrarian turn. Not every business is safe just because it is a business. Trendy restaurants, cash-burning startups, brands that only look strong when money is cheap and credit is easy. Models like that often turn out to be far more fragile than people think. The asset that survives is not the one that sounds most exciting. It is the one standing closest to real demand. And when the domestic currency itself becomes the problem, society usually takes one more step. It starts looking for another measuring unit. That brings us to the next asset, strong foreign currency. The fifth asset is strong foreign currency. When a domestic currency begins to slide, people do not need to read monetary theory to understand what is happening. They only need to look at the price of bread, the price of fuel, the cost of rent, and then look back at their salary. Once that gap starts widening too fast, society tends to do the same thing. It moves toward another unit of account. That is why, in so many crises, from Latin America to Eastern Europe, the U.S. dollar, the Swiss franc, or any currency seen as more stable becomes a temporary refuge. Not because it is perfect, but because in a room full of people who are bleeding, the one bleeding less is treated as healthy. A strong foreign currency gives you two things. First, a better chance of preserving purchasing power than a collapsing local currency. Second, mobility, and in a crisis, the mobility of capital can matter almost as much as the value itself. When the domestic system starts tightening, what can move across borders, or at least move across a cycle of devaluation, becomes far more valuable than it first appears. But strong foreign currency is not the final safe haven either. It is still paper money, still a promise, just a stronger promise, for a longer stretch of time. It may help you get out of a burning house. It does not guarantee the whole city will never catch fire. That is why the last asset on this list is not in a vault, not on a trading screen, and not inside a foreign bank account. The sixth asset is essential skill. An essential skill is something people will still pay you for even when the financial system is cracking. Electrical repair, plumbing, medical care, farming, construction, maintenance, transport, security, cooking, production, skills tied to real human needs. This is one of the least discussed assets, but often one of the most durable because it does not just preserve value, it creates new value. When money changes, when the rules change, when office work gets compressed and credit dries up, the person with an essential skill still holds something society cannot stop needing: the ability to be useful. That is the special power of skill. It is an asset that can travel with you. Land is powerful, but it does not move. Gold is durable, but it does not generate daily income. Foreign currency is flexible, but it is still a promise issued by another system. Skill, if it is real skill, has mobility, adaptability, and its own kind of pricing power. It crosses borders more easily than real estate. It survives policy shifts more easily than a pension. It is harder to erase with a bureaucratic decision than a number sitting in an account. This is where the video needs to pull straight back into the viewer's life. In a monetary crisis, the question is not only what you own, the question is also what you can do if the numbers that used to make you feel safe start drifting away from reality. What skill do you have that other people would still pay for with better money, with gold, with goods, or with opportunity? What looks safe is often just familiar. What actually survives is usually tied to need, utility, and the ability to serve real life. So this is the pattern history keeps repeating. When money dies, fixed financial assets often die with it. Nominal savings get hollowed out. Bonds get betrayed. Fixed pensions shrink in real terms. The cleanest looking assets often turn out to be little more than promises standing on a foundation that is already cracking. What survives, again and again, sits outside that promise system. Productive land, gold, silver, businesses with pricing power, strong foreign currency, essential skills, 6 asset classes, 6 different ways to stand closer to real value. Instead of standing closer to the symbol of value, this is not a call for panic, and it is not an invitation to speculate. It is a much simpler warning. Do not confuse the measuring unit with wealth. Do not call something safe just because you have seen it your entire life. History has seen this before. The tools changed. The pattern didn't. So ask yourself a sharper question than the ones most people ask about investing. If the rules of money changed tomorrow, would what you own still be real wealth, or just a promise waiting to be devalued? Leave one word in the comments. Out of these 6 asset groups, which one are you actually closest to today?